The office was finally quiet. Not the good kind of quiet, not the peaceful hum of a productive day ending, but the heavy, expectant silence that comes right before a party. Down in the lobby, the last of the sunlight bled through the big glass windows, painting long orange rectangles on the polished floor. Up on the 17th floor, in the open plan space of Bloom Creative, the transformation was almost complete. Desks usually covered in sketches and laptops were pushed aside. In their place, long tables groaned under the weight of fancy-looking canapes, cheese wheels with little knives stuck in them, and buckets of ice cradling expensive bottles. Twinkling lights were strung up between the structural pillars, and a low, pulsing beat from a hidden speaker promised fun. It was the company's annual summer party. The one night where the strict lines between the bosses in their corner offices, the creative teams in their colorful nooks, and the account managers in their crisp shirts are supposed to blur. For most, it was a highlight. A chance to be seen, to laugh a little too loud near a senior partner, to maybe plant a good idea while holding a drink. Elena moved through this growing buzz like a ghost. She was a small woman in her late 50s, with a gentle face framed by soft, graying hair she kept tied back in a simple bun. Her hands, resting on the handle of her wide cleaning cart, were her most telling feature. Practical, capable hands with short nails and a network of fine lines. She wore her usual uniform, comfortable dark trousers, a pale blue polo shirt with the building management company's logo on the breast, and sturdy, silent shoes. Her cart was her territory. It held her supplies, glass cleaner that smelled sharply of vinegar, soft yellow cloths, a spray bottle for disinfectant, a heavy-duty vacuum cleaner hose coiled like a sleeping snake, and a collection of black plastic bags. As the first wave of employees arrived, their laughter a little too bright with early nerves, Elena began her work. She moved from desk cluster to desk cluster, emptying the small personal waste bins into her larger bag. She didn't make eye contact, but she wasn't rude. If someone's path crossed hers, she would offer a small, tight smile and a barely audible "Scusi me," before melting back into the background. To the people of Bloom Creative, Elena wasn't really a person. She was a function, a part of the building's nightly rhythm, like the hum of the air conditioning shutting off. She was the reason their desks were clean in the morning. Some of the kinder ones, usually the older assistants or the quieter IT guys, would give her a nod or a hello, but most just sidestepped her cart, their conversations never breaking as they flowed around her, an unchanging rock in their fashionable stream. The party noise swelled. The music got a bit louder. A young man from the digital team, already loosening his tie, almost backed into her. "Whoa, sorry," he said, glancing at her cart and then past her, already looking for his friends. He didn't wait for a reply. Elena didn't mind. She preferred the invisibility. It let her observe, and in a strange way, it protected her. She knew who was dating who, from the whispered conversations she overheard while dusting. She knew which manager was stressed from the crumpled-up strategy reports in his bin. She knew the junior designer who ate a whole family-sized bag of crisps at her desk every afternoon from the empty packets she fished out. It was a quiet, peripheral knowledge that asked for nothing in return. Her cart creaked as she pushed it towards the far corner of the floor, the one they called the library nook. It wasn't a real library, just a few low bookshelves with industry award trophies and some beanbags. And in the corner, tucked under a potted fiddle-leaf fig that was always on the verge of dying, stood the piano. It was an old upright, its dark wood scarred and dull. One of its front legs was slightly shorter than the others, making it list to the left like a tired old ship. The lid was closed, and a thin layer of dust made the surface look fuzzy. It had been wheeled in 2 years ago by a well-meaning director who thought it added authentic, creative clutter. Since then, It had become a glorified shelf for abandoned coffee cups and party hats. It was famously, hilariously out of tune. Last Christmas, the CEO's assistant had tried to play Jingle Bells on it, and the sound was so jarringly awful, it had become an office legend. Now it was a prop, a joke. Elena stopped her cart near it. For a moment, her eyes lingered on the piano, not with annoyance at the dust, but with a different kind of recognition. Her gaze dropped to the keys, just visible in the gap above the fallboard. They were yellowed with age, like old teeth. She didn't touch it. She just gave it a slow, almost imperceptible look, a look that held a secret. Then she turned to empty the bin beside the beanbag dot over by the main drinks table. A group was getting lively. They were the Rising Stars, a clique of young account managers and designers who thrived on being the center of attention. At their center was a man in his early 30s. He was handsome in a sharp, polished way, his hair perfectly styled, his laugh a little louder than anyone else's. He held a craft beer and held court. Let's call him David. David was bored. The initial thrill of free drinks was wearing off, and he needed a new source of amusement. His eyes scanned the room, skipping over the talking clusters, the people nervously nibbling cheese. They landed on Elena, bent over her cart, carefully sorting recyclables from trash. Then they slid to the broken piano beside her. A slow, mischievous smile spread across his face. He nudged the guy next to him, a fellow manager with a trendy beard. "Hey, watch this." He cleared his throat, putting on a performance voice that cut through the chatter around their group. Well, look over there," David announced, pointing his beer bottle towards the corner. A few people in his circle turned. "I think we've been overlooking the real talent in this room." Elena, sensing attention, straightened up slowly, a used paper plate in her hand. David strutted a few steps closer, drawing more eyes. "Everyone, this is Elena, and I have it on very good authority," he said, winking at his friend, who looked momentarily confused, "that Elena here is a secret virtuoso, a concert pianist in hiding. Isn't that right?" Elena froze. The paper plate trembled slightly in her grip. She shook her head, her voice a soft, fragile thing. No, I'm not." "Nonsense," David boomed, playing to the growing audience. He spread his horns wide. "Come on, don't be shy. We've got the instrument right here." He gestured grandly at the derelict piano. A few people chuckled, catching on to the joke. They knew the piano was a disaster. This was going to be funny. "Play us something, Elena," David called, his tone dripping with false encouragement. "A little party music. Don't leave this beautiful baby grand gathering dust." The word baby grand, applied to the broken upright, made a couple of people snort. The crowd around David had grown. They were now a semicircle of about 15 people, curious smiles on their faces. They saw a flustered cleaner and a terrible piano. They saw the setup for a harmless, hilarious bit of office humor. Elena felt her face grow hot. She wished the floor would swallow her. "Please," she whispered, more to herself than to them. "I just clean." But David wasn't letting go. The laughter from the crowd was his fuel. "Oh, come on. Just one song. We're all family here. It's a party." Others, emboldened by the group mentality and the alcohol, started to join in. "Yeah, give it a go, Elena. Don't be a spoilsport. Let's hear it." The chant started softly, then grew. "Elena, Elena, Elena." It wasn't mean-spirited, not really. It was the sound of a crowd that wanted a show, any show. Without thinking about who was on the stage, Elena stood trapped between her cart and the dusty piano. The kind, invisible shell she carried around her was cracking under the pressure of all those eyes. She looked from one smiling, expectant face to another, seeing not individuals, but a single, hungry entity. David's smile was the widest, his eyes sparkling with triumphant mischief. He had created the evening's entertainment, with a sigh that seemed to come from the very bottom of her worn-out shoes. Elena gave a tiny, defeated nod. The chanting died down, replaced by an eager, whispering hush. The party in the rest of the room continued. A distant roar, but in this corner, a strange, silent theater had been erected, slowly, as if every movement cost her something. Elena walked the 3 steps to the piano. She ignored the abandoned coffee cup on top of it. She placed her hands on the dusty lid for a moment, not to clean it, but as if to steady herself. Then she pulled out the rickety, stained stool and sat down. Her back was straight, but her shoulders were hunched, as if trying to make herself even smaller. David crossed his arms, leaning back against the desk, ready for the cacophony. A young woman beside him had her phone half out, thinking she might record the funny noise to share later. Everyone waited. The joke was about to reach its punchline. Elena looked at the keys. She didn't see a joke. She saw a battlefield of chipped ivory and worn ebony, a graveyard of neglected sound. Very slowly, she reached out her right hand. Her practical, cleaning-worn index finger hovered for a second, then pressed down on middle C. The note that came out was flat, dull, and dead. It didn't ring. It thudded. It was the saddest sound. A predictable titter rippled through the audience. David's smile threatened to split his face. This was perfect. Elena didn't react to the laugh. She pressed the F above it. Another dead, woody clunk. Then the a sour, disagreeable sound. She was testing, listening, her head tilted slightly. She played a simple C major chord with 3 fingers. It was horrifically discordant, like nails on a slate. The crowd's laughter grew louder, more relaxed. This was exactly what they'd expected. What they didn't see was the change in Elena's eyes. The fear and embarrassment were being pushed aside, replaced by a deep, focused concentration. She was no longer hearing the piano as a room full of people heard it. She was listening to its soul, its particular aches and breaks. She was having a silent conversation with the instrument, learning its new, twisted language. The laughter around her faded into a distant buzz. Her world shrank to the span of the keyboard, the feel of the keys under her fingers, and the painful, beautiful memory of music that lived, untouchable, inside her. She took a slow, deep breath, settled her hands in her lap for a second, and then lifted them, poised above the yellowed keys. Ready to speak, the laughter died down, not out of respect, but because the punchline seemed to be over. The discordant chord had been played, the joke delivered. A few people in the small crowd started to turn away, their interest waning now that the expected funny noise had been made. The man who had started it all, the one with the sharp smile, took a satisfied swig of his beer. Mission accomplished. But Elena didn't get up. She stayed on the rickety stool, her hands now resting lightly on her knees. Her back, which had been hunched in defeat, slowly straightened. It was a subtle shift, but it changed her entire silhouette. She was no longer shrinking. She was settling in. She looked at the keyboard with an expression that was impossible to read. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something closer to assessment, like a gardener looking at a patch of wild, overgrown land, seeing not the weeds, but the potential shape of the garden beneath. Her eyes moved slowly from the bass notes on the left to the treble on the right, taking inventory of the damage. Very deliberately, she reached out her right hand again. This time, she didn't press a key. She brushed her fingertips along the tops of the black keys, the sharps and flats, feeling the dust come away on her skin. It was a tender gesture, almost like smoothing the hair from a child's forehead. The few people who were still watching grew quiet, puzzled by this new development. This wasn't part of the script. Her left hand came up now. She played a single note deep in the bass, an E. It was a low, groaning sound, like a big animal shifting in its sleep. She held the key down, letting the feeble vibration hang in the air until it faded into nothing. She nodded slightly, as if the piano had told her a secret. She tried the F above it. This one was even flatter, a dull thump with no life at all. She made a soft HM sound in her throat, a practical sound, like a mechanic diagnosing a faulty engine. Then she began to work in earnest, but it wasn't playing, not yet. It was tuning by ear, in her mind. She would play a note in the middle of the keyboard, then quickly play its octave lower or higher, wincing when they clashed horribly. She found a G that was so sharp it sounded like a cat's yowl, and she immediately avoided it. She discovered a cluster of 3 keys in the mid-range that, when played together, produced a sound so jarring it made a woman in the front of the little audience physically flinch. Elena simply noted it and moved on. She was mapping the battlefield. She was learning which soldiers in this broken army were too wounded to fight, which ones could be repositioned, and which ones, against all odds, could still hold a line. The room's noise, which had started back up, began to die down again. This was strange. This was intentional. The man with the beer, let's keep calling him David, felt a flicker of annoyance. The show was supposed to be over. Why was she still up there, poking at the keys? Come on, maestro, we're waiting for the symphony. He called out, trying to reignite the laughter. Elena didn't seem to hear him. Her entire being was focused on the instrument. She played a simple, slow scale with her right hand, C to C. Every other note was wrong, but she didn't fight it. She adjusted the pressure of her fingers, sometimes playing a wrong note softer to make it sound like a passing shadow, sometimes emphasizing a note that was almost in tune. It began to sound less like a mistake and more like a strange alien melody. People stopped turning away. They were leaning in. The phone that had been put away came back out, but now it wasn't to record a joke. It was to capture this odd, quiet moment. The young woman holding it didn't smile. Elena finally brought both hands together. She placed them over a set of chords in the middle of the piano, her fingers curved with a grace that seemed utterly foreign to the hands that had, just minutes before, been tying off a trash bag. She took a breath, a deep, slow breath that lifted her shoulders and then let them fall, a breath of release. All the tension, the embarrassment, the weight of being unseen, seemed to leave her on that exhale. She closed her eyes, and then she began to play. The first sound was not a melody, but an atmosphere. Her left hand pressed down on a low, rumbling chord. The notes were flat, yes, but together in that register, their flatness created a deep, brooding, bluesy foundation. It was a sound full of twilight and old wood. It was the sound of the piano's own age and neglect. But she had harnessed it, made it the bedrock of the music. Then her right hand entered. It didn't dance. It wept. It picked out a single, pure line of notes higher up. The tune was hauntingly familiar to some, a classical piece that spoke of loneliness and longing. It was Chopin, but it was Chopin heard through a rain-streaked window, remembered in a dream. The out-of-tune notes were no longer mistakes. They were bends in the road, sighs in a story. When she hit a note that was painfully sharp, her fingers would instantly soften, blurring it into a cascade of other notes, turning a shriek into a shimmer of sorrow. The change in the room was physical. The remaining chatter in the distant parts of the floor sputtered out as the music reached them. Heads turned. Someone near the drinks table put down a glass with a sharp clink. That sounded too loud in the new quiet. The small crowd around the piano was frozen. David's smirk was gone. His mouth was slightly open, the beer forgotten in his hand, growing warm. He wasn't seeing the cleaner anymore. He was seeing the music come out of her. It was pouring from her fingertips, from the set of her jaw, from the slight sway of her body that had begun to move with the rhythm. She was no longer at an office party. She was somewhere else entirely, in a room only she could see. The music swelled. Elena's hands moved with a certainty that was breathtaking. They weren't the hurried, efficient hands of her job. They were confident, expressive, telling a story without words. The broken piano, under her command, was singing. It was a raw, wounded, beautiful song. It spoke of things the glossy office never did, of loss, of memory, of quiet dignity, of beauty persisting in broken places. A young man in the crowd, one of the graphic designers who spent his days making things look perfect, felt a sudden, unexpected tightness in his throat. The imperfect sound was infinitely more real than anything on his screen. The woman with the phone lowered it to her side, ashamed to be filming something so private, even though it was happening in public. The melody climbed, filled with a fragile hope, then tumbled back down into the deep, resonant blues of the bass. Elena's face was serene, lit only by the soft glow of the party lights. A single tear, unnoticed by her, traced a path through the fine dust on her cheek. She wasn't crying from sadness now. She was crying from the sheer release of it, from touching something she had locked away for so long. For 3 minutes, no one in the entire office moved. They were prisoners of the beauty she was creating from the wreckage. The security guard by the main door, a big man with a stern face, had stopped his rounds and was standing still, his keys silent at his belt. The CEO, who had been talking in a corner, fell silent and just listened. His head tilted. In those 3 minutes, every assumption in the room was dismantled. The hierarchy of job titles meant nothing. The expensive clothes, the clever conversations, the ambitions, they all faded into background noise. The only thing that was real, the only thing that held any power, was the woman and the broken piano speaking in a language everyone understood in their bones. The final passage came. It was a series of falling notes, like leaves drifting from a tree, each one landing softly on the foundation of that deep, enduring bass chord. She played the last note, a middle C that, in its dull flatness, sounded like a heart finally coming to rest. She held the key down, letting the last vibration hum through the body of the piano and out into the silent room. Then it was over. Her hands lifted and returned to her lap. The connection was severed. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking as if waking from a deep sleep. For a second, she looked confused, seeing the outline of people standing in the dimness around her. She looked down at the keys, then at her own hands, as if surprised to find them there. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a thick, living silence, full of the echo of what they had just witnessed. It was not the silence of boredom or indifference. It was the silence of awe. No one clapped. No one knew how. Clapping felt wrong, like applauding a prayer or a confession. Elena's practical mind seemed to re-engage. A moment of transcendence passed, and the reality of her situation crashed back in. She was sitting at a broken piano in the middle of her workplace, with everyone staring at her. A flush of heat returned to her cheeks, but it was a different kind of embarrassment now. She had shown them too much. Without looking at anyone, she stood up. The stool scraped softly on the floor. She pushed it neatly back under the keyboard with her foot, the automatic gesture of someone used to putting things in order. She turned away from the piano and walked the few steps back to her cleaning cart. Her movements were slow, measured. She placed her hands on the cart's handle, her fingers curling around the familiar, hard plastic. Then she simply pushed it. The wheels gave their familiar creak, breaking the sacred silence. She began to move, heading towards the kitchenette to finish collecting the trash. She kept her eyes fixed on a point on the floor ahead of her. The crowd parted for her once more. But this time, they didn't step aside with dismissive haste. They moved slowly, deliberately, making a wide berth. They looked at her face, but she didn't meet their gaze. They saw the tear track in the dust. They saw the woman who had just played the soul out of a dead piano. She passed by David. He tried to say something. A word, an apology, a stunned question. It got stuck in his throat and came out as a strangled, "I." Elena didn't pause. She didn't acknowledge him. She walked past him as if he were a piece of furniture, which, in her world, he suddenly was. The cart rattled away around a partition wall and was gone. The spell was broken, but the room was changed. The party lights seemed too bright, too cheap. The music from the speaker sounded tinny and fake. People looked at each other, but no one knew what to say. They just looked at the empty space where the cleaning cart had been, and at the old broken piano sitting quietly in the corner, which now seemed like the most important thing in the room. For a long moment after she left, the corner of the office was a museum of stunned people. The air still felt charged, like after a summer storm. The young woman finally put her phone all the way into her pocket, her face warm with a private shame. The graphic designer rubbed his eyes, trying to look casual, as if something had just been in them. The man with the beer, David, stood frozen. The beer bottle was heavy and forgotten in his hand. The triumphant smirk he'd worn earlier was gone, replaced by a hollow look. He felt something he wasn't used to feeling, small, and not in a way he could laugh off. He watched the space where she had disappeared, and his own joke sat in his stomach like a cold, hard stone. He had wanted a clown, and he'd gotten a concert. He'd aimed for humiliation and had instead witnessed something sacred. The contradiction made his head buzz. Slowly, awkwardly, the crowd began to dissolve. There were no loud goodbyes or bursts of laughter. People just drifted apart, back to their groups or toward the drinks, but the energy of the party was broken. Conversations started up again, but they were hushed, distracted. People kept glancing over at the old piano, as if expecting it to play by itself. Dot in the kitchenette, Elena worked. Her hands moved on autopilot, pulling the half-full trash bag from the bin under the sink, tying it off with a sharp, precise twist. The familiar motions were an anchor. She could hear the muffled beat of the party music starting up again, but it sounded far away, like noise from another building. Her heart was still beating a little too fast, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She relined the bin with a fresh black bag, smoothing out the edges. She wiped down the counter where someone had spilled a splash of soda, her cloth moving in tight, perfect circles. She was putting her world back in order, one clean, predictable square inch at a time. But inside, everything was swirling. She hadn't played like that in years. Not since before the move, before the need for this job, before life had gently, firmly boxed that part of her away. Letting it out had been like opening a door to a room she'd kept locked for a decade. The air from that room was still rushing past her, thrilling and terrifying. Back in the main area, a woman in her 40s with sharp glasses and a no-nonsense haircut, the office manager finally moved. She had been standing off to the side, observing everything with a quiet, analytical face. She walked not toward the party, but toward the piano. She stopped in front of it. She didn't touch it. She just looked at it, really looked, as if seeing it for the first time. The dust, the chipped keys, the wobbly leg. Then she turned and walked with purpose toward the CEO, who was sipping water by the window, a thoughtful frown on his face. Near the drinks table, a small group had reformed, but the topic had changed. That was unbelievable, a young woman said, her voice low. I know. I actually got chills. My arms, look, said another, holding out a forearm. What was it? That song? It sounded familiar. Classical. Sounded like a movie soundtrack, but sadder. They all looked over at David, who had finally set his beer down and was pretending to check his phone. His face was closed off. One of them, a guy who usually laughed at his jokes, shook his head slightly. Man, that was heavy. David just shrugged, a stiff, defensive movement. She can play. I'll give her that. He tried to say it lightly, but it came out flat. He walked away, needing to be somewhere else. Elena pushed her cart out of the kitchenette and toward the restrooms. As she passed by clusters of people, she felt the weight of their eyes again. But it was different now. It wasn't the amused, superior stare from before. It was curious, hesitant, almost shy. A few people offered small, tentative smiles. She kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, on the floor, on her cart, on the next task. A young intern, a girl who couldn't have been more than 20, suddenly stepped in her path. "Excuse me," the girl said, her voice earnest. That was really beautiful. "Thank you." Elena stopped. She looked up, meeting the girl's eyes for a brief second. She saw no mockery there, only a kind of wonder. Elena gave the smallest possible nod, so slight it was almost not there. "Thank you," she whispered back, her voice rough from disuse. Then she moved around the girl and continued on her path. The simple words, "Thank you," from the young girl, did something strange. They didn't make Elena feel better. They made it more real. The music hadn't been a private thing anymore. It had been a gift received. The thought was overwhelming Dot in the women's restroom. It was quiet and cool. She locked the main door behind her for a moment, leaning against it, finally alone. She let out a long, shuddering breath. In the mirror over the sinks, she saw a stranger, a woman, with flushed cheeks and bright, watery eyes. She saw the dust smudge on her temple. She turned on the tap, ran cold water over her wrists, the way her mother used to do when she was upset as a child. The shock of the cold helped. She splashed a little on her face, patting it dry with a paper towel, washing away the tear track and the dust. When she came back out, the party was beginning to wind down. The music was lower. People were gathering coats, saying quieter goodbyes. The cleanup from the event was always a big job, and her shift was far from over. She started at the edges, clearing the plates and cups left on desks. Her cart gradually filling up with the glossy debris of the celebration Dot as she worked near the library nook again. She saw the office manager walking back toward the piano, this time with the head of facilities from the building. They were talking in low, serious tones. The facilities man was nodding, running a hand over the piano's top, feeling the dust. "Needs a proper tuning, at the very least," the office manager was saying. "And maybe we could have it moved somewhere a bit more respectful. This corner gets too drafty." Elena quickly moved away, not wanting to eavesdrop. But a tiny, fragile spark, something she thought had gone out long ago, flickered in her chest. They weren't talking about getting rid of it. They were talking about fixing it. The CEO approached her as she was collecting bottles for recycling. He was a tall man with a kind, tired face. "Elena," he said. His voice was gentle. She stopped, bracing herself. "That was an extraordinary thing you shared with us tonight," he said. He wasn't smiling a big party smile. He looked sincere. "I had no idea we had such talent right here." "Thank you." Again, that word. Talent. It sounded so foreign applied to her. She just nodded, unable to find any words. If you'd ever like to play it when it's in better shape, you'd be most welcome," he continued. "It should be used by someone who understands it." She managed another nod. "Thank you, sir." He gave her a last, appreciative look and moved on. Finally, the last of the guests were gone. The senior staff had left. It was just her and the night security guard now. The big room was a mess, but it was her mess, her domain. She turned off the twinkling lights, plunging the party area into the ordinary, flat glow of the overhead fluorescence. The silence was a relief. She vacuumed the carpet, the roar of the machine filling her head with a blank noise. She wiped down the long tables, now sticky with spills. She worked methodically, steadily, for over an hour, returning the sleek, modern office to its pristine, impersonal state. The only evidence of the party was the mountain of full trash bags by the service elevator. When she was done, she took one last walk through the space. Her footsteps were the only sound. She found herself drawn back to the piano corner. The fiddle-leaf fig tree cast a long shadow. The piano sat. She walked over to it. This time, alone in the empty office, she didn't sit. She just stood beside it. She reached out, and with the clean corner of her cloth, she carefully wiped away a perfect circle of dust from the center of its lid. The wood beneath was dark and scarred, but it had a deep glow under the fluorescent light. She didn't play a note. The music was still inside her, a quiet hum now, not a storm. She placed her palm flat on the wood she had cleaned, feeling the cool, solid surface. It was a connection, a silent agreement between the two of them. Then she turned away. She pushed her empty, clean cart back to the supply closet, locked it up. She gathered her own things from her locker, a worn coat, a scarf, a lunchbox. She clocked out with her key card at the back entrance. The security guard nodded to her. "Night, Elena. Heard you made quite an impression." She gave him the same small, tight smile she always did. "Good night." She stepped out into the cool night air. The city sounds rushed in cars, distant sirens, the hum of life. She took a deep breath. The smell was of exhaust and coming rain, not of glass cleaner and dust. She walked toward the bus stop, her hands deep in her coat pockets. The thrilling panic of the performance had faded, leaving a deep, quiet exhaustion. But it wasn't the usual tiredness from her feet and back. It was the tiredness that comes after something important has happened. As she waited for the bus, she replayed it in her mind. The pressure of their eyes, the dead sound of the first key, the moment she closed her eyes and let go, the perfect, fragile silence after the last note. For years, her music had been a secret, a ghost living in the apartment she shared with her sister, in the quiet home of her own memories. Tonight, for 3 minutes, it had been real. It had breathed the same air as other people. They had heard it. They had felt it. She didn't know what it would mean on Monday. Would they look at her differently? Would the man who started it avoid her? Would people ask her to play again? A flicker of anxiety returned at the thought. That had been a one-time thing. A crack in the wall. She wasn't sure she could, or wanted, to do it again. The bus arrived with a sigh of air brakes. She climbed on, paid her fare, and found a seat by the window. As the bus pulled away from the curb, she watched the bright windows of the office building shrink and disappear behind other buildings. The ghost was out of the box now. It was sitting quietly beside her on the bus seat. It wasn't clear if it would go back in. She rested her head against the cool glass of the window, closed her eyes, and for the first time all night, she wasn't thinking about cleaning or chords or the stares of strangers. She was just a woman, tired from a long day, going home. But somewhere deep inside, in a place that had been silent for a very long time, a single, clear note was still ringing. The weekend passed in the quiet, predictable rhythm of Elena's life outside the office. Groceries with her sister. Laundry flapping on the small balcony of their apartment. The gentle, murmured dialogue of old black and white movies on the television. She scrubbed their small bathroom until the tiles shone, the physical work a welcome anchor. She did not speak of the piano. Her sister, who knew the whole history, who had lived through the years of practice, and the subsequent painful silence sensed a difference in her. A preoccupation, a light behind her eyes that had been dim for a very long time. But she didn't press. They had an understanding, built on shared history and loss, that some things were better left in the quiet. Monday morning arrived with a gray drizzle. Elena's usual bus was late, making her heartbeat quicken with a familiar, low-grade anxiety about her timing. The walk from the stop to the gleaming office tower felt longer. Her blue polo shirt and dark trousers, freshly washed, felt like a costume today. She kept her head down as she entered the service entrance, clocked in, and collected her cart from the closet. The building had its weekday smell-fresh coffee from the ground-floor cafe, lemon-scented polish from the overnight crew, and that sterile, recycled air. The 17th floor was quiet, just the soft tapping of early bird keyboards. Sunlight, pale and weak, tried to break through the rain-spotted windows. She started her route in the far corner, away from the library nook. Her hands were steady as she emptied bins, but her senses were hyper-alert. She felt the weight of the coming moment, when she would have to pass that corner. When she finally pushed her cart around the partition and into the open-plan space, she allowed herself a glance. The piano was gone. The spot where it had listed for years was empty. Just a faint rectangle in the carpet pile, slightly darker than the rest, and the lonely fiddle-leaf fig tree. A cold feeling, surprising in its intensity, washed through her. Of course, they'd had it removed. It was a piece of junk. Her performance had been its last strange hurrah. The spark of feeling from Friday night guttered and went out, replaced by a flat, heavy certainty. This was the real world. Broken things got thrown away. She turned her cart sharply and headed for the kitchenette, her throat tight. She focused on the sticky ring a coffee cup had left on the counter, spraying it clean with a furious hiss from her bottle. Looking for the old wreck? The voice made her jump. It was the office manager, the one with the sharp glasses. She was holding a mug and had a small, knowing smile on her face. Elena just nodded, unable to speak. "Come with me," the woman said, her tone not unkind. She turned and walked, not toward the main exit, but down a short, rarely used hallway lined with small meeting rooms. Puzzled, Elena followed. Leaving her cart behind out at the end of the hallway was a door marked Wellness Room. It was a new initiative, a place for people to take a quiet break, though it was mostly used for private phone calls. The office manager pushed the door open and stood aside. Inside, the room was small and peaceful. A comfortable-looking armchair sat in one corner, a bookshelf with a few plants and stress-relief toys in another. And there, against the wall opposite the window, where the morning light fell softly across it, was the piano, but it was transformed. Its wood, once dull and dusty, now glowed with a deep, warm patina. Someone had lovingly oiled and polished it. The wobbly leg had been repaired, making it stand straight and proud. The lid was open, and the yellowed keys looked cleaner, though still worn with age. Most noticeably, a sleek, modern piano bench sat before it, replacing the rickety stool. We had the facilities team work on it over the weekend, the office manager said, her voice softer here. Tuned it as best they could. It'll never be perfect, but it's much better. Cleaned it up. We thought it deserved a proper home. Somewhere quiet. She looked at Elena, her gaze direct but not intrusive. The CEO's instruction. He said it should be available to anyone who wants to use it. Elena stood in the doorway, her cleaning cloth still clutched in her hand. She stared at the piano. It looked like a respected elder, now sitting in a place of honor. "It's beautiful," Elena whispered, the words feeling inadequate. "It is," the office manager agreed. "It just needed a little care." She paused, then added, "My door is always open if you need anything." With a final nod, she walked back down the hallway. her heels tapping a quiet retreat. Elena was alone with the piano. The door was open behind her. She could hear the distant, muffled sounds of the office beginning its day. She took a tentative step into the room. The air was still. She walked over and stood before the bench. She didn't sit. She just looked at the keys, now waiting in the clean, quiet light. The spell was broken by a polite cough at the door. She turned. A young woman from the design team, the one who had lowered her phone on Friday, stood there looking hesitant. "Sorry to bother you," the young woman said. I wanted to say again, that was incredible on Friday. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it." She shifted her weight, nervous. "My name's Chloe." Elena gave her a small, genuine smile. "Thank you, Chloe. Is it okay if I sit in here sometimes? Just to read on my break? I won't make any noise." Elena was taken aback. "It's not my room," she said softly. "I know. It's just... It feels different now." Chloe gave a quick, shy smile and then disappeared. The morning passed in a strange new rhythm. People didn't ignore Elena. They made eye contact. They said, "Good morning, Elena," and meant it. The man from the IT department, a large, quiet man who always wore band T-shirts under his button-downs, stopped her by the printer. "Hey, that Chopin was spot on," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Nocturne in C-sharp minor. My mom used to play it." He didn't wait for a response, just gave her a firm nod of respect and walked away. The connection was startling. She saw the man who had started it all, David, from a distance. He was in a meeting, talking animatedly, but when his gaze swept the floor and landed on her, it skittered away quickly. He looked embarrassed, maybe even ashamed. He didn't approach her dot at lunch. She ate her sandwich in the small break room off the service corridor, as always. But today, the head of the facilities team, a gruff man in a blue uniform, came in. He poured himself a coffee and sat down across from her, not speaking at first. Then he said, "That piano. Had to order a special part for the leg. Interesting old thing. Good bones." He took a sip. "You play it real good." Then he got up and left. It was the longest conversation they'd ever had. The attention was overwhelming. It was kind, but it was a spotlight on a part of her she had kept in the shadows. She felt exposed, like a creature that had crawled out from under a rock and was now blinking in the sun. She found herself taking a longer route to empty bins just to avoid passing certain desks where people might try to talk to her in the afternoon. She had to clean the wellness room. She pushed her cart to the door and peeked in. It was empty. She went in and began dusting the bookshelf, polishing the low table. Her work brought her closer to the piano. She could smell the faint, clean scent of the wood polish. When she dusted its top, she was careful. Gentle dot as she finished, a middle-aged accountant from the finance department, a man she knew only as someone who left a lot of crumpled-up paper in his bin, appeared at the door. He looked stressed, his tie loosened. "Do you mind?" he asked, gesturing weakly at the room. "Not at all," she said, gathering her things to leave. He didn't go to the armchair. He walked to the piano and sat on the new bench. He didn't open it. He just sat there, his hands on his knees, his back to her, staring at the closed lid. He was just sitting in the quiet, near the instrument. After a moment, his shoulders, which had been hunched up near his ears, slowly relaxed. He took a deep, audible breath and let it out. Elena slipped out, pulling the door almost closed behind her. She understood. The piano wasn't just an instrument anymore. It had become a symbol, a touchstone for something real in the middle of all the glass and stress and ambition at the end of her shift. As she was preparing to leave, the office manager found her again. "Elena, a quick word?" She led her to a small, tidy office. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable," she began, sitting behind her desk. "But what you did on Friday, it resonated with people. More than you know." She folded her hands. "We'd like to offer you a different arrangement. A few hours a week, during lunchtimes, to play in the wellness room. Not a performance. Just background. For people who need a moment of peace. It would be a separate contract, paid of course. No pressure. You could say no." Elena's mind went blank. Paid to play. The two concepts had never touched in her life. Music was from one world. Wages were from another. I need to think," she managed to say. "Of course," the office manager said. "Take your time." The bus ride home was a blur. The rain had stopped, leaving the city gleaming under streetlights. The ghost was no longer just beside her. It was walking in front of her, holding out a path she had thought was forever closed. When she got home, her sister was cooking soup. The small apartment was filled with the warm, savory smell. "How was your day?" her sister asked, stirring the pot. Elena hung up her coat. She walked into the kitchen and leaned against the doorway. She told her about the piano in the new room, about the looks, the words, the offer. The words tumbled out, hesitant at first, then in a rush. Her sister listened, her stirring slowing. When Elena finished, there was a long silence, broken only by the gentle bubble of the soup. Her sister put down the spoon and turned, her eyes bright. "They want to pay you? To play?" Elena nodded. A smile broke across her sister's face. A smile that held decades of memory of a girl at a grand piano in a sunlit living room. Of music floating through their old house. Of the long, quiet years after. "Then you have to think about what you want, Elena. Not what you think you should do. What you want." Later that night, standing at their own small balcony window, looking out at the grid of lighted windows in other apartment blocks, Elena felt the decision settle within her. Quiet and clear as the first correct note on a freshly tuned string. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about performing. It was about the man sitting in the quiet room, his shoulders slowly coming down. It was about the young girl's shy smile. It was about the piano itself, rescued and waiting. It was about the ghost, not being put back in the box, but being offered a chair. A place to sit. To simply be. She knew what she would say tomorrow. The next morning, Elena didn't go straight to her cart. She clocked in, the familiar beep sounding like the starting note of a new song, and walked with a quiet purpose to the office manager's door. It was open. The woman looked up from her computer, her expression neutral, but her eyes attentive. "I've thought about it," Elena said, her voice firmer than usual. "I would like to try. The playing at lunchtime." A genuine smile softened the office manager's features. "I'm very glad to hear that. Let's start next week. Just Wednesdays, 12:30 to 1. See how it feels." Elena nodded. It was a small commitment, a toe in the water. It felt safe. "Thank you." "No," the office manager said gently. "Thank you." The week passed in its usual rhythm of emptying and cleaning, but the texture of the days had changed. The piano, now a resident of the wellness room, became a quiet legend. People would pop their heads in, sometimes giving Elena a small wave if she was in there dusting. The young woman, Chloe, did indeed come in to read during her break, curled in the armchair with a novel, the silent piano a comforting presence. Elena noticed other things. The man from the IT department left a packet of high-quality piano key cleaner on her cart with a sticky note that just said, "For the old girl." The facilities manager had placed a small, inexpensive, but thoughtful humidifier in the wellness room to help protect the instrument's wood. These were not grand gestures, but they were real. They were a language of respect, and she understood it. Wednesday arrived. At noon, A flutter of nerves woke in Elena's stomach. It felt different from the forced spectacle of the party. This was a choice. She finished her morning tasks, then went to the small service bathroom. She washed her hands carefully, not just to clean them, but as a ritual. She looked at her face in the mirror. The woman looking back was still her, in her blue polo shirt. But something in her own eyes was steadier. At 12:25, she walked to the wellness room. The door was open. She went in and closed it softly behind her. The room was empty, filled with calm, gray daylight. She sat on a new bench. It was firm, supportive. She opened the piano lid. The keys, now clean, seemed to greet her. This was the moment. Alone in the room, she could play anything. She could practice scales, make mistakes, stop and start. The pressure was gone. She let her hands rest lightly on the keys and breathed. Then she began, not with a dramatic Chopin, but with something simple. A gentle, flowing piece by Satie, its notes like clear water over smooth stones. The tuning was better, not perfect, but the piano's voice was truer now. Its character intact, but its pain eased. She played for 5 minutes alone, relearning the feel of the keys without an audience. Then, at precisely 12:30, she heard the door open softly behind her. She didn't turn. She continued playing, the music a soft stream in the quiet room. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Chloe slip in and settle into the armchair, opening her book. A few minutes later, the door opened again. It was the stressed accountant from finance. He gave Elena a grateful, almost apologetic nod, took the other chair, and leaned back, closing his eyes. He didn't sleep. He just listened, his face gradually losing its pinched look. Elena transitioned smoothly into a slow, melancholic folk tune, then a piece of quiet jazz. This wasn't a performance. It was atmosphere. It was a space held together by sound. She kept her playing subdued, a background to thought, not a demand for attention. More people came. A young intern, looking overwhelmed, sat on the floor against the bookshelf, hugging her knees. A senior partner Elena recognized, but had never spoken to, stood just inside the door for 3 minutes, listening, before slipping back out to the hallway. For that half hour, the wellness room lived up to its name. The only sounds were the music and the soft sighs of people unwinding. Elena felt a strange, new sensation. It wasn't the white-hot exposure of the party night, nor the satisfying solitude of cleaning an empty office. It was a feeling of usefulness, but of a different, deeper kind. She was not cleaning away dirt, but somehow, softly, brushing away a little of the day's tension for the people in the room. She was serving them, but with her gift, not her labor. At 1 o'clock, she finished the piece she was playing, a simple, unresolved chord that faded gently into the silence. She lowered her hands. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then the accountant opened his eyes. "Thank you, Elena," he said, his voice rough. He stood up and left, his step lighter. The others murmured their thanks and drifted out. Chloe was the last. She paused at the door. "That was perfect," she said, her smile warm. Then Elena was alone again. She sat for a minute in the afterquiet. Her hands were not tired. Her heart was calm. It had been good. More than good. It had felt right. She closed the piano lid, gave the wood one soft pat with her palm, and went back to her cart to finish her shift. The rest of the day was normal, but the memory of the quiet room stayed with her. A soft light in her mind, that the weekly sessions became a small, cherished routine. Word spread quietly. The Wednesday lunchtime listen. People started to call it. No one demanded showstoppers. Sometimes Elena played classical pieces. Sometimes old jazz standards. Sometimes simple improvisations that wandered like daydreams. The group was fluid, sometimes 2 people, sometimes 8, never a crowd. It was a pause, a shared breath. One Wednesday, about a month in, she was playing a particularly soft rolling piece. A door opened later than usual.